Live. Good afternoon. We will reconvene this regular council meeting of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan on this Monday, June 26th. It is 1:01 p.m. There is no report from closed session, so with that, we'll go right to the next portion of our agenda, which is the presentations, item 7.1. Chris Vanderheyden, Program Manager, Asset Management Advisory, PSD Citywide. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Just to confirm that you can hear me.
We can, thank you.
All right. So I'm just going to share my screen.
We can share the screen. I think staff are going to do it. If you can just indicate when you'd like to move slides, we can do it that way, Chris, if that's okay.
Okay, just 1 second here. For some reason, my computer timed out, which we're good to go. Okay, so I think we're good. Thanks for having me join you for the presentation of the asset management plan today. Interestingly enough, we amended the original 2022 asset management plan. There was some visualization, some graphs that were incorrect that we have since amended. And just to confirm with everyone that the numbers, the replacement costs, and also the capital projections were correct. So it was just a matter of updating those graphs. But this also provides us an opportunity. As I understand, there's 3 new council members that have joined Cavan-Monaghan's elected officials. So this will be a good review for those council members on what was already presented, as well as talking a little bit about the OREG compliance within the province of Ontario and Cavan-Monaghan's progress over the years in their asset management journey. So if we can move on to the next slide. And there we go. Just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Vanderheyden. I am a manager of asset management advisory here at PSD Citywide. I have been with PSD Citywide for over 7 years now. I come from a municipal government background prior to joining PSD with the County of Oxford in southwestern Ontario, where I was responsible for many roles within the county over the years, from corporate services, GIS, asset management, to public works engineering, supporting the planning department, water, wastewater department, and so on. So very well versed in all the different aspects of municipal government. Next slide, please. So I think we skipped 1 slide, and maybe ahead of myself here. I'm looking at 2 different screens. There we go. Thank you. So PSD Citywide and Cavan-Monaghan have been collaborating for a number of years now, including their first 2013 asset management plan. For our current project, we aim to develop an updated AMP that was compliant with the first leg of the OREGs, OREG 588 and 588.17 regulation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the presentation. As part of the current project, we held supporting workshops with staff covering 4 areas that you see here on the screen, which is inventory data refinement, risk and criticality analysis, life cycle strategies, and also levels of service in this project. Next slide, please. So why the need for municipal asset management? We can acknowledge that municipal infrastructure assets are vital for communities. And from our perspective, we also need. Asset management is a way to organize what we own, a way to understand what services we provide through those assets, a way to ensure accountability to our residents and stakeholders for the services they use. These 3 key objectives are really the driving force, not only the regulation, but the increased awareness among various stakeholders on the need for asset management. Next slide, please. So if we put some context behind this and look at the national findings, the 2019 Canadian Infrastructure Report Card found across Canada, and if we compare that, a large portion of infrastructure is in fair condition. The majority of infrastructure is more than 20 years old, and the stormwater infrastructure is the most, by far, the unknown, which means a lot of municipalities did not have an inventory of storm infrastructure, or they had a lot of gaps in their data, meaning they didn't have material sizes or diameter sizes because stormwater infrastructure was simply installed in the ground years ago, and no inherent risks at that time or in the foreseeable future. So we just typically forgot about those assets and didn't really keep a really close eye on those types of assets over the years. Next slide, please. So comparing the asset portfolio of Canada with the township, we can see there's some similarities here. And the township is in a similar position as other municipality and faces the same critical issues. There's aging infrastructure throughout Canada. I work with municipalities from the East Coast to the West Coast and everywhere in between. And aging infrastructure is becoming more and more prevalent. Climate change and extreme weather. We know that things are happening from coast to coast, and depending on your geographic location, those climate impacts can vary. So we need to also keep that into consideration. And general market trends that we've seen a downturn and will continue to be volatile over the next few years, as we all can understand what's happened over the last few years with COVID and the economies throughout the world. So that it's forever a changing dynamic, and we have to adapt to that. Next slide, please. So what does asset management involve? From a municipal perspective, the value is the level of service we are providing to our residents. A high-level set of parameters that we can use to determine the level of service of a particular system or network is there on the screen. And you can see that it's a balance of cost, performance, and risk. And ISO 55000 refers to asset management as the coordinated activity of an asset organization to realize value from their assets, which is very similar to a level of service from that municipal context. So from a cost perspective, how much will it cost to own, to replace, to repair any given asset? And when will this cost be required? And when will it be updated? We know that the markets have changed, and the cost of assets, raw materials, and resources to manage those assets are changing drastically. The performance of assets. So what is the current output or performance of the asset? Is it in poor condition? Is it in good condition or very good condition? This gives us the information we need to make conscious projections or predictions of what the needs are coming forward in the future. And then we have risk. What is the potential risk of assets failing? So understanding the consequence of failure to the public, to the level of service that you provide to your municipality. And are you able to identify high-risk assets in your asset portfolio? Next slide, please. So what does asset management involve? To fully determine the level of service we are providing, and then to identify critical steps to address the potential downturns on the level of service, asset management should be spread throughout the organization, meaning it's a collaborative effort, and every department must be involved. Starting with the asset portfolio or your asset inventory, in short, the township should work towards establishing that centralized asset inventory that is agreed upon by all stakeholders, from finance to public works, and has the critical data points needed to identify risk or cost performance, ultimately the level of service that you're providing to the municipality. Next slide, please. So if we think about the typical asset management framework, and this is what the Township of Cavan-Monaghan has been working towards over the years. And it starts in it starts with the assessment phase. And in that assessment phase, you're really just determining what you have, and it's answering those key questions. What do we own? What is it worth? Where is it? And also defining some policies and objectives around that asset management to be able to manage that going forward. And as you can see that list below, what's your asset management objectives? Is it endorsed by council? Governance and structure. And governance and structure is at many levels. It's from the asset management program itself to the actual governance of data and information and how you're going to support that going forward and making sure that it's current and up to date. And then also an asset management strategy. So you do a current state of maturity within your municipality, and then you develop a framework for the future on how you're going to improve and go forward in the future. Then that planning phase is now understanding what you need to do and how you need to do it. Let's start planning that out. Key data initiatives. What are we missing? What do we have to include and what do we need to support meeting these OREG requirements going forward in the future as well, condition assessments, and key AM or asset management processes, and that is the risk, life cycle, and levels of service. And from there, you can actually action and implement or execute your asset management program through your asset management plans, what is exactly what we're talking about today. And the OREG is referring to the OREG requirements on the province, in the province of Ontario as well, which really gives you that more accurate short and long-term budget projections. From there, you still will have to monitor and review KPIs, benchmarks, which are going to assist you with those levels of service that you're tracking. And then also communication, and it needs to be continual. Communication is very important, and it's not just internal communication, it's communication internally with your elected officials and also with the public. They need to understand what they're getting for their tax dollars and need to be able to understand what levels of service is all about. Next slide, please. So if we look at the progression over the years with the township did develop and produce an asset management plan in 2013. But at that time, it was relying primarily on historical indexing, a more financial based asset inventory. So not so much from an engineering perspective or an actual needs, it was a financial calculation and transaction, which that met the needs for finance, but it wasn't really meeting the needs for asset management. The asset management plan we are presenting today is more comprehensive with additional asset categories and asset data from various data sources. It also uses accurate replacement cost methods and consolidates condition data from condition assessments. So taking that information from the field and translating that into digital information that helps us then make those data-driven decisions going forward into the future. Next slide, please. So with the completion of this asset management plan, the township really is in a good starting point to establish a centralized asset inventory, which now contains the 4 key elements mentioned. And that's, your TCA, condition assessments, life cycle strategies, and risk frameworks, and also including staff and consultant and market data, which has really built that centralized asset inventory. The tangible capital asset inventory was derived from the PSAB 3150 in 2008. Condition assessments, the most recent from a 2020 road needs study, was incorporated into your asset management inventory. Life cycle and risk models were developed that was part of the project. And finally, important collaboration from staff and consultants and the factoring in general market data as described. Next slide, please. So if we review OREG, what is OREG? For all of you, for the few new council members, if you're not aware of the OREG, Ontario Regulation 58817, it started out in 2019 with an asset management policy. With the completion of this asset management plan, the township has achieved full compliance with the first phase of Ontario Regulation 588 for AMPs. So we can see that in 2019, there was an asset management policy, but specific to asset management plans, you've met the requirements for 2022. In fact, the township has gone ahead and done an inventory analysis on non-core assets also, which is something that is not required until 2024. But getting a jump on that, it has greatly assisted in identifying deficiencies and data gaps to prepare for that 2024 and 2025 OREG compliance. And just for reference, core assets is referring to roads, bridges, culverts, water, and wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. All other assets within your asset inventory or portfolio are considered non-core, which is your buildings, facilities, parks, land improvements, machinery, equipment, and vehicle assets. Next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about the OREGs and what's coming next on this next slide. So in 2024, we have to have an asset management plan for all non-core and core infrastructure, including your current level of service. In 2025, municipalities also have to outline their proposed levels of service or target levels of service that they would like to achieve over the period of 10 years going forward. But also a financial plan to support those target levels of service. But what comes after 2025? Well, the regulation requires that all AMPs must be updated every 5 years thereafter, and that council conduct an annual review of its AM progress on or before July 1st every single year, and that the AM policy and plan be posted on the municipal website. So what that really means is you don't have to revise or update your asset management plan every year, but council must go back. You must look at those target levels of service and review whether you're making progress, because it is a moving target and it's dynamic. Meaning, okay, maybe on year 2, it's apparent that you're not meeting your target levels of service or meeting those targets that you would like to achieve. Maybe you're actually falling behind. At that point, you must review why is it we're not meeting our targets, and you may have to readjust your strategy based on that. But that's what the purpose of the OREG is continuous improvement. 5 years thereafter, you will have to then redo your asset management plan with current inventory within the 2-year window. Next slide, please. So your asset management plan was based on 2020 year-end financials. It really answered the question what the current state of the municipal infrastructure was at that time. What process improvements can increase confidence in analysis and decision making? So under identifying data gaps, information that you may want to incorporate into that inventory to give you better analysis going forward, and also start looking at the KPIs and data required for levels of service. But also, what is the township's financial capacity to meet those long-term requirements? Next slide. So this is just an overview of the asset management plan findings. So the total replacement cost of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan's asset portfolio is valued at $215 million, which really is equivalent to $14,457 per 100,000 CVA, and that's based on your census data, 2020 census data, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken. Next slide, please. So if we look at the replacement cost method of the current asset portfolio, so what this really means is, are we relying on current industry data, replacement cost data, or looking at historical cost indexing using CPI tables from historical costs? And we can see for the sanitary network, only 49% of assets have actual defined replacement costs, 82% for the road network, 94% for buildings and facilities, 80% for water, fleet being the least at 1%, and land improvements 3%, and then stormwater 31%. So overall, only 67% of assets in your asset portfolio rely on current replacement values. And I can't stress this more importantly now, with the increase in raw materials and employment or resourcing over the last few years, we can't simply rely on indexing. CPI tables take a little bit of time to adjust. So we're basing that information on maybe inflationary indexes that are not current today's standards. We know in some cases, I've worked with municipalities in some areas where their costs have tripled over the last 3 and 4 years. So significant increases for those more remote communities. Next slide, please. The overall condition of the asset portfolio, and it's good to understand that this isn't asset by asset. This is it's distributed by replacement cost of the asset portfolio or asset category. So when we see 47% of the sanitary network is in good condition, that's the 47% of the total cost, replacement cost of that inventory is in 47% condition. It's not the number of assets. And we can see that within this is a good visual graph. And really what it relates to is 60% of assets are in fair or better condition within the municipality. Next slide, please. Condition assessments in the asset portfolio. So when we look at that, how many assets are we relying on assessed condition? And assessed condition by far is the best information available to project your capital requirements going forward. But we can see here that the road network itself is relying on 87% of assessed condition, water being next at 30%, 6%, and sanitary at 15%. All other asset categories are simply relying on age-based condition, which is a calculation of in-service date, the estimated useful life of the asset, which then can be translated into service life remaining. And that's what we're basing that condition on. There are some staff assessments and also consultant input along with these formal studies like the road needs study. Age-based condition does typically overstate the needs and overall deficit. So, again, I will stress this again, that assessed condition is very important, and, investing in assessments is definitely well worth investment. Next slide, please. So what does asset condition data, how does it relate to decision making? Well, it does help mitigate risks associated with asset failure. And if you can think about this at a high level, it's not just about a road failing. If you had assessed condition of the underground infrastructure as well, the road segment itself may be at higher risk than originally thought, because if the underground infrastructure is also at high risk and poor condition, the elevation of risk of that road's failure is much higher. Again, assessed condition can help identify the most economic interventions. So doing the right thing at the right time based on that assessed condition. And really it boils down to accurate prediction of future expenditure requirements instead of solely relying on age-based condition to give you those projections. Next slide, please. This slide here is just looking at the age of assets, and according to these calculations, 16% of the assets are over 25 years old within the township, which may indicate that there may be some needs coming forward. And if we look at the distribution on this graph, 58% of the road network is over 25 years old, 41% of sanitary, and so on. So it just does give you some information around what those needs are coming forward. Next slide, please. This slide here is the useful life remaining of assets. Again, majority of assets are relying on age-based assessments. So again, it's not a true prediction, but it's the best we have. And according to that information and data, 54% of assets will require replacement in the next 10 years. I'm almost confident if you were to get more assessments done on other asset categories, that number will change. And in most cases, it's a much better picture than what age-based condition has to offer. Next slide, please. And we also looked at the life cycle of assets, and just really at a high level, what is life cycle maintenance or management of assets? And it boils down to the deterioration of assets and what you do at the right time. What are we spending now in the short term? What are we spending in the midterm? And what are the things that are required to do in the mid to long term to extend the life at the lowest possible cost? And that really what it boils down to. But you need to document that, and you need to apply it to your asset inventory, your asset management system. Your system is there to create efficiencies within your asset management space or program. But without data, our systems, our technology relies on data. Without data, and you've probably heard this term, it's garbage in, garbage out. It can only give you the information as accurate as the data that's applied to those assets. So when we talk about life cycle interventions and full life cycle management of assets, it really is about the data and information about those assets. Next slide, please. And if we look at this example here for the road network, we can see that if we applied and did the right thing at the right time to the assets based on recommendations, industry recommendations, and internal knowledge, in most cases, there is a cost avoidance by doing the right thing at the right time. If we just solely looked at build, replace, and that's what end of life replacement means. We build, we replace. And it really kind of takes you back to that do the worst first kind of methodology. The cost avoidance for the municipality alone for LCV roads can be anywhere from $2 to $2.4 million in cost avoidance by doing the right thing at the right time with those assets, applying the right budget to those interventions over time. Next slide, please. How is risk calculated? Well, risk is really, it's the probability of failure times the consequence of failure, and it comes in many different forms. If we look at the probability of failure of site, it's based on condition, but it's much more than that. We have to look at the accelerators to the deterioration of assets. And what that really means is if you have extreme weather or climate change impacts in your municipality, how does that accelerate the deterioration of that asset? Assessed condition is great, but what are the things we need to look at even further? Pipe material. Some pipe materials are much more resilient than others in certain soil types, and so on and so forth. From the consequence of failure side of things, economic impacts, environmental impacts, social impacts, but then there's much more to that. There's operational impacts, there's health and safety impacts. This all relies on data. We can calculate this manually, but without the data, your system can't generate these calculations for you. And if we go to the next slide, this is an example of what those outputs will give you. It really starts to put things in perspective, and a good risk model will assist with prioritizing and applying resources to the right asset at the right time. And if we go to the next slide, we can just, from a visual perspective, what does that really mean? Well, if it's a low consequence of failure, it's really just routine monitoring. We know we don't have to do much of the asset, but we need to have routine inspections and keep an eye on our assets. As the assets go up in consequence of failure, but also start to age, stay back one slide, please. There we go. It starts to change the way we manage our assets, and we start looking at those life cycle interventions. When we get to the higher consequence of failure from a probability of failure perspective, we may want to start predicting those failures. So now we're monitoring these assets a little bit closer and starting to predict when we need to replace these assets. And up in the top quadrants there, you can see that when they become high risk assets based on all those different factors, it's immediate action. These are assets now at a point where we cannot ignore them any longer. Inspect them, rehabilitate them, or replace them. Because if we don't, the impacts are far greater to those levels of service in the municipality. Next slide, please. Forecasted capital requirements. So this graph, this is one of the changes that was made to the asset management plan. And within the plan itself, they are specific to pages 30 and 37 within the asset management plan. So the capital forecasts and also the individual capital forecast for the road network. And really what this shows is what those needs are over the next 10 years. And we can see there's a couple spikes. And this graph, it's a good graph because we can start to see where are these spikes coming from. Well, we can see in 2026, it's the road network seems to be taking up the main part of that spike. In 2028, it's the wastewater network. And then in 2029, it's the water network. And this is annual requirements of $7 million every year going forward to meet those needs. Next slide, please. But if we look at it from a long-term perspective, and this graph here is another graph that was updated because the graph was incorrect. This one's based on 5-year average capital requirements. So putting all of that into 5-year buckets so we can look at that long-term forecast. And really what it equates to is $35.1 million on a 5-year average over the next 80 years. And the reason we do this is so we capture every iteration of replacement of every asset included in the asset management plan. So we've incorporated that at least for one replacement of each asset. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the financial strategy, what is driving the financial strategy? Well, we're looking at the annual capital requirements and also the infrastructure deficit, looking at your funding sources. And one thing it is to remember for the new council members, when we start looking at increases to taxes and we look at these capital projections and your deficit, in Ontario, asset management plans can only incorporate sustainable funding sources. So not one-time grants or transfers, but gas tax, OSIF, reserves, rates, etc. So we do not incorporate those one-time infrastructure funds that come and go and they're not sustainable. We never know when they're coming. So you have to look at this from a perspective that it needs to change. It needs to be updated based on the information that you know. Currently, if we look at only sustainable funding sources, all of your assets are funded at about 54% of their long-term capital requirements based on the information provided in the asset management plan. Next slide, please. So if we look at those average annual reinvestment rates and we compare them to the national average, you're not that far off. And this comes from the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card from 2016. So you can compare your road network to the national average, and you can see that there's a target rate of 3.99% for the municipality, and the target rate for on the national average back in 2016 was only 2.2% to 3%. But if we put that in today's value, I think we would probably see that would increase similar to what you're experiencing at the township. But you can see in some areas you've been investing actually more. Your current rate is actually more than the average was back in 2016. So you've been performing well over the years, but we need to look at the long term when we look at these target reinvestment rates. Those target reinvestment rates are very critical to the levels of service as well. When you start looking at those target levels of service going forward in the future and that 10-year financial plan to support it, this target reinvestment rate for each asset category is definitely going to be a calculation you want to keep on top of. Next slide, please. So with that, in this asset management plan, we look at the financial strategy. So on the tax funded assets, we're looking at a total tax rate increase of 19.9% over the next 10 years, which really equates to 1.9% tax rate increase every year for the next 10 years to meet those sustainability requirements. For water and rate funded assets, total rate increase of 1%, which is only equates to 0.2% increase every year for the next 10 years. And sanitary being, the one that is needs a higher rate increase. Total rate increase is 95.3%, and this is not, when I look at compare you with other municipalities throughout Canada, this is not shocking. We see a lot of municipalities experiencing these same forecasts, and that annual tax rate increase is 4.6% over a 15-year period to meet sustainability requirements. Now, the township did conduct a rate study in November of 2020. So that information will definitely be used when you look at your 2025 asset management plan in those target levels of service. Next slide, please. And that brings us to our next steps. Really continue and refine asset inventory and consultation with internal departments and key stakeholders and third-party consultants if necessary. Because again, I can't reinforce this more. We rely on technology to increase our efficiencies, but without data or technology cannot give you the information in an accurate format. Conduct asset management needs assessments to identify your resources and investment requirements. Provide staff and council training opportunities to ensure asset management principles are understood. There's lots of good resources out there on the internet, so it's not hard to find. Prepare for OREG. We talked about that in depth throughout this presentation. The key one here is developing those levels of service statements and identify levels of service metrics for non-core assets for the 2024 requirement. So that's the updated asset management plan with new inventory. And looking at that medium to long-term external communication strategy to engage the public. So if we look at the next year and a half going up to 2025 requirements, it's going to be key to engage the public on levels of service. That's going to help you define what those target levels of service are. And then when you roll this out, the community is not going to be shocked. They're well educated. They understand what levels of service is. They know how it relates back to the taxes and the rates they pay and so on. And then also continue improvement and regular review. Your asset management plan is a living, breathing document that is in sync, or will be in sync with your asset management system, which is the software that Cavan Monaghan uses to manage your assets. And also continue to operationalize the asset management database through its functionality, utilizing to its fullest extent. So next slide. With that, I'll just open it up to questions. I will remind everyone that I did not develop the asset management plan. That was an advisor with PSD Citywide that moved on his career. I simply am representing with the new graphs, the asset management plan to everyone and the new councillors. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for that, Chris. One thing I just wanted to clarify, I might ask Ms. Pope to do it if Chris hasn't, just out of hand. With regards to the financial strategy, just to clarify, obviously tax funded, that makes sense. We're all aware what the levy funds, but for the water rate and sanitary rate, those increases that are proposed, the 4.6 for sanitary and the 0.2, can you just confirm that's isolated, not rogated to the levy, because the levy doesn't fund those two pieces of infrastructure. It's the user fees that are on that system. Can you just confirm that, Kimberly? I just want to know if those numbers are accurate.
Thank you. Through you to council. Yes, the tax funded portion of 1.9% is the forecasted amount that would actually relate to our tax rate increases. The other two components being water and sanitary, they're set by the 5-year plan for water wastewater user fees, and they're not associated with our tax rates. So that 0.2% and 4.6 being forecasted would be on the user rates and not our tax rates.
Thanks for that, Kimberly. Questions, members of council, while Chris is with us? Councilor Byrne?
Through you, Chair. The 80-year forecast, does that take into account anything on the consultant reviews we have for expansion in the township, or is that present day thinking that nothing's going to change?
That's a very good question, and through you. The important thing with growth, this asset management plan does not currently consider growth, but for 2025, you have to incorporate growth into that financial strategy. And I don't know if that's the exact answer you're looking for, but it will need to be incorporated for that 2025 plan. So if you're going to be looking at experiencing growth over the next 10, 20 years, you must include that in those projections as well.
Thank you, Chris. The only other question, just from your expertise, and we've seen citywide at other some of the conferences and whatnot, in your experience in the asset management space, one of the things that has come up in certain discussions with other municipalities is, for those of us that are, doing the hard work of increasing tax levies to accommodate and actually pursue asset management with conviction, it'd be curious. So on that point, one is, do you have any access, maybe in future presentations or future updates, that you might be able to share sort of province-wide data as to where municipalities fall with regards to the effectiveness? So you mentioned similar sort of summaries in the presentation with regards to the infrastructure of those municipalities, but not where they are at comparably with their asset management plans from an investment standpoint. And then my second question is more in sort of the generalities. One of the things that I've never understood is that there's the commitment and the financial decision-making that goes into committing to asset management doesn't seem to be recognized by more access to a lot of government funding. So they've created this recent requirement in the last 10 years about, requiring these plans and adding more to them as they go. Is there any sort of rumblings about increased access to funding and grants? I know there's one or two that have some components, but they're very minimal. Like, they require you to have a plan. They don't require you to hit a threshold of your asset management contributions. Is there any discussion about what, sort of data that might actually incentivize municipalities to be more committed to these sorts of critical plans?
Thank you. Those are two really good questions. On the first question, in comparison to other municipalities, it's hard to. I see a similar trend. When I see this with many municipalities, and the reason being, we see these annual tax rate increases, and it can be shocking. But what I found is there's a lack of data information. So we have to take that with a grain of salt. I wouldn't say currently today, even the infrastructure report card is based on what data? Is everybody supplying this information in a consistent format? Probably not. It's the best information they have. So currently today, I would say it wouldn't be accurate to compare municipalities. But here in Ontario, I do believe by 2025, we'll be at a point where we will be able to comment and compare those numbers with other municipalities in your size and geographic location. I think that's something we definitely could. And as I mentioned, by experience, I see this a lot, and it's because of the information and data that's not there. And if I look at specifically the sanitary rate funded assets, we see that 4.6. If we go back to that presentation, you may have a good inventory of assets, but what we don't have is assessed condition. And in many cases, a lot of underground infrastructure is actually performing better than what the financial data is telling us, which is the depreciation of an asset or the amortization of an asset. When it's fully depreciated, okay, it's supposed to last 60 years, but Meanwhile, it could last another 20 or 30 years. So that's answer to question one. I hope that gives you some answer or some reference. As far as question two, that's a very good question. We never know when there's going to be funding. I know that there's funding towards asset management. The last rumblings that I heard of any sort of funding towards asset management would be towards climate change adaptation. Now, that's something that will be rolled out by the federal government again. But again, outside of that, I can't really comment on whether there's more support coming from the federal governments or even the provincial government to assist with asset management. And again, it's a similar story from coast to coast. Even municipalities or provinces that don't fall under regulations still struggle with the resource capacity to be able to take on asset management holistically. And I do see a trend in the West. I work with many clients in Alberta, for example. They see what's happening in Ontario and they're already starting to prepare for what they think is going to come their way with these requirements that Ontario municipalities are subject to. And they're hiring full-time asset management coordinators. They're actually putting a new position and getting it approved through council to help support those programs moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. And when you see some of the larger sort of macro examples from the market conditions with, things like sanitary and water, I mean, a lot of those, at least in Ontario, those systems were installed by the provincial and federal governments, usually jointly, and we're just handed over, here's the keys. And, thanks for all of that. But, a lot of them are now hitting that 50 to 70 year mark and are needing that replacement. And, I think there's going to be a real push, as you're already starting to see it in Grey County and other municipalities, that they can't afford the cost to replace these massive archaic systems. So anyways, we'll see what happens. Ms. Pope, you had a comment with regards to the comparisons of asset management plan.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to all of council. Just one thing to note is that as we've been moving along all the legislative requirements, each municipality had to achieve a minimum standard, but most of us were trying to work towards greater than that minimum standard. An example for this municipality, which Chris alluded to earlier, is that we were putting in all of our assets, not just our core assets when we could. Once we got public sector digest, we began to work ahead. But if you were to compare our municipality at that time to others who were just doing the bare minimum, we may have looked in like we were in a worse case because we had more data in there. And so until we hit these benchmarks, then we can compare municipality to municipality. So what Chris and others are trying to do is when we are doing comparisons, we're only comparing the legislative requirements, because you could have municipality A with additional information in there and municipality B without that information. And then now you're not comparing apples to apples. So as we move forward, and he talked about the 2025 regulation deadline, that's where we will be more on board and everything will be more at a level that we could compare. So it's not that we don't want to, and we are sort of looking to see what those comparisons look like. But to be fair, we can't really compare until everybody has equal information in their asset management plans.
And just to the
Pope. Chris, do you have a comment? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's through the mayor and the council. Just to add to that, it will be time before we get to that point, but Ontario is going in the right direction. And if you also think about your data, your information that you are keeping in your inventory, we see the new requirement by the province. The CRVs have just come out by July, current replacement values that are essentially, they look at OSIF funding allocations, but also has to be in line with your asset management plan. So it's really pushing municipalities to get a good understanding of what they really do own and what it's worth. And we will get to a point where I'm sure I will be confident, at least with the clients that use PSD Citywide software, which we mainly do our advisory services with. I'm confident we will be able to compare apples to apples eventually, and all of this will make a little bit more sense.
Thanks for that, Councillor Nashoff.
Thank you through you, Chair. Just to speak again for the comparison to other municipalities, specifically to the useful life remaining, and that you had this statistic of 54% of our assets will require replacement in the next 10 years. Could you speak, is that a good percentage for us compared to other communities? Is this, obviously we would want to have it a lower number, but 54, is that good?
Very good question, and back through the chair. again, it's hard to indicate whether that's a good or a bad percentage. As we saw earlier, your underground infrastructure has no assessed condition. So at this point, there's no way to validate whether the estimated useful life or service life remaining of those assets is actually correct, because it should be based on assessed condition or performance. And, you know, in my experience, whenever municipalities have gotten the assessments done, it's a completely different picture. And unfortunately, in some cases for older municipalities, that picture was far worse. And in other municipalities, that message was that the prediction was much better, meaning their assets were in much better condition than what they initially thought based on their age-based condition. And until we have that information, it's really hard to say whether that's good or bad. I'm sorry, that's not a perfect answer, but it's the best I can do.
Well, it leaves some room for optimism, Chris. So I think we'll take it when it comes to asset management funding it. No offense, misspoke. I see no other questions. At this point, we're looking for a motion to receive the information in the presentation. Councillor Byrne, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much for the presentation, Chris. I'm sure we'll see you again.
Thank you very much.
Very well. With that, we'll move on to 7.2, which is the Cavan Monaghan Public Library Board. Ms. Buckborough will be presenting. Carla, I understand from your email that there's an amended presentation, so we need a motion of council to receive that amended presentation. Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. Very well. So I think is the amended, that's on the screen for everyone to see if you're following along. It wasn't in your printout, just so you're aware. Okay. So Carla, just hit that button. I'll hit mine off, and then once you're done, you can.
How to make something more stressful. Yeah. Hello, Council. I'm here today for two reasons: an update on the official library budget, and then a very brief update on library activities and highlights from the last 6 months. If you can move on to the next slide. So in February 2nd, at the council meeting for the budget, council approved a capital request as it was for the library, but approved an operating levy of $306,520. If the number on the screen is unfamiliar, it's because I used the department summary, which rolled in $1,000 surplus that the library had from 2022 into our number. This amount was about $21,000 less than what I had in my original request. We understand the need for fiscal restraint, and with great difficulty made the required adjustment to fit the $306,520 amount that council approved. Next slide. This adjustment was possible due to the retirement of a staff person. We adjusted our staffing level by lowering staffing hours by 10 hours per week, which, as I said, was by the retirement of a long-term staff person. We didn't refill that position to the full capacity. And then we also budgeted for only one summer student instead of two. The budget with these changes was approved by the library board meeting in March 2003. The wage amount on here of $292,000 that we are using for 2023 doesn't follow over to the summary because it's a departmental summary and there are some wage-related revenues that offset. The public library operating grant includes a wage pay equity subsidy, as well as the funding that I expected to get from Canada Summer Jobs Grant. So that is the difference of $10,000 between the $292,000 that I have on the screen and the $282,000 that's on the summary printout sheet. So that is how I and the board managed to fit our budget into the amount that the council has given us. So moving on to our library highlights. Despite the adjustment to our staffing levels, we're trying to provide the same level of service to our community while growing new programs where we see needs arise. In partnership with Christian Horizons, we've added 2 story times for adults with physical and mental disabilities. These started off with 5 gentlemen coming to the library with a caregiver from Christian Horizons. and has grown now to 24 participants coming in on Tuesday mornings at the Bruce Johnston branch. It's quite a happening place at 11 o'clock in the morning. We are also hosting bi-weekly story times at Centennial Place, where the programmer from the library is going in and having reading with the residents at Centennial Place. The needs and what we are doing are assessed by discussions with members of the community, as well as trends in other libraries. We like the fact that the library is an open and welcoming space to everyone of all walks of life and abilities. And we are proud that we provide volunteer opportunities for 3 young people with special needs. We've continued with some of our longtime programs, such as our Toonie Movie Night, but we've also added some other new programs that the community has asked for, chess and book clubs. And these are very well attended. Our summer programming will start next week in July. Next slide. The change of board has been an interesting time, with only 1 member continuing over from previous board to new. There's been quite a learning curve for all of us. The new board is making the strategic plan a priority, making sure that it's a document that works for us and provides clear direction for the library. The first thing that we are working on is a marketing and communication plan so that we can make the library a more visible space in the community. Next slide. As for community, we attended the BIA's kickoff to summer event. More than 80 people took part and painted little canvases. These were collected and they're going to be shown in the libraries. We'll have boards set up in both that will display them, and we're hoping that the families will come in and take a look. And then the next slide. We have a very exciting announcement. I applied for and have received a almost $25,000 grant through the Seniors Community Fund to host a program. The big idea of it is trying to fight social isolation amongst the older community. And so we're calling it Collecting Our Stories. The hope is that seniors and older people in the community will come to the library and we will help them with coaching, with writing their memoirs or family histories, or just anything they want to write up through a series of meetups, workshops, and that kind of activity that will hopefully foster a sense of community. As well as at the end, I'm hoping that we will have a book that we can publish that will go in the libraries and have copies for the resident or the participants. We will be having our official launch in mid-August, and the activities will be starting off in September. The next 2 slides are just the summaries that I spoke to at the beginning that show the library budget amounts. And that's all. I've decided to keep this short and quick for today. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Carla. Questions, members of council? Councillor Natchoff.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Not a question as much as just a congratulations on getting the community grant. I think it's a really great idea that you've thought of, and that I wish you all the best with this. I think that, to include our seniors community, especially with the Manor and Centennial Places, really speaks to how much that the library cares about the community. So congratulations. I hope it goes well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well said, Councillor Natchoff. It's a great opportunity, and obviously our community has lots of storytellers in it, as I'm sure council is aware, and it probably comprises some of them. So anyways, that's going to be a great project, and definitely will produce something probably fairly entertaining as well as historical. So that's great. Congratulations on that. With no other questions, I can look for a mover to receive the library board presentation for information. Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you, Carla, for that. We have no delegations at this point, so we'll move to the public meeting before us. So I need a resolution from council to open the public meeting. Deputy Mayor Huntley and Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. I believe Miss Ellis, are you going to be presenting the report? Very good, Miss Ellis.
Mayor Graham, members of council, staff, members of the public. The public meeting today is for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for an existing lot of record located at 2148 Davis Road in part of Lot 1, Concession 11 of North Monaghan. This property is located in the hamlet of the 5 Mile Turn. Brian Wildman and Maggie Webster have applied to the township for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. They would like to build a new house on the property. The property is currently developed with a single detached dwelling that's just under 800 square feet in size. The applicants wish to construct a larger dwelling, and they wish to use the existing single detached dwelling as an accessory apartment. The property is currently designated hamlet, which permits residential uses. It's zoned hamlet residential. Standard permitted uses in the hamlet residential zone include a single detached dwelling and an accessory apartment. In our zoning bylaw, an accessory apartment has to be located within the main dwelling. To have an accessory apartment in a detached building, a planning approval is required. So that is why you are that's why you are seeing the zoning bylaw amendment application before you today. The existing detached garage will remain on site as well. With the proposal before us today, the applicants can satisfy all of the standard regulations of the hamlet residential zone in terms of setbacks from the front side and rear yard, lot coverage, minimum landscape space, etc. The only change that we're making with the application is to permit the accessory apartment to be located in an accessory building. Because the property is located within the hamlet of the 5 Mile Turn, and there are a significant number of properties in that hamlet that were created without the benefit of current information in terms of hydrogeological information, in terms of water quality and quantity. With the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, we are proposing to put the property into a holding provision to start with. And should council approve the zoning bylaw presented to change the zoning on the property, we would apply that holding provision, and that holding provision would only be lifted once a scoped hydrogeological study has been submitted that demonstrates that a sufficient quantity of acceptable quality water is available to support the existing use and the proposed accessory apartment without unacceptably interfering with existing nearby wells. So what that means is we're looking for a scoped hydrogen study to say we have enough water and it's of suitable quality to service the new dwelling without adversely affecting existing users in the area. As required by the Planning Act, notice of this application was circulated to all assessed persons within 120 meters of the subject property or 400 feet. We've circulated to the required ministries and agencies. We circulated internally to management staff. And we've posted a sign on the property. So we meet the requirements of the provision of notice as required by the Planning Act. To date, the township had not received any written comments or oral comments from any member of the public about the proposed amendment. Township staff have no objections to the application. There was a site plan provided with the application that was attached in the report. And as part of the building permit application, the site plan will be required with grading and drainage information. And an entrance permit will also be required. Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board reviewed the application, and they did not identify any concerns or issues related to their mandate. Both Canada Post and Enbridge Gas provided emailed information that they have no objection to the application. Autonomy Conservation staff confirmed in a letter that the application is consistent with section 3.1 of the provincial policy statement. A permit is not required from the authority for the project, and the subject property is not located within an area that is subject to the policies contained in the source protection plan. So in terms of agency comments and staff comments, we're pretty good as far as planning applications go. The application was reviewed in terms of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan official plan, Peterborough County official plan, the provincial policy statement, and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And in planning staff's opinion, the application does conform to the Township and County official plan, the growth plan, and is consistent with the provincial policy statement. So with the application today, the subject property will be rezoned from the Hamlet Residential Zone to the Hamlet Residential Exception 20 Holding 12 Zone. And as I've indicated, all of the standard regulations of the Hamlet Residential Zone will continue to apply, except for an accessory apartment will be permitted in an accessory building.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. It's now that time for members of council to ask any questions of staff at this time. Questions? Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, if this proceeds, and I don't see a problem, how would it impact other properties in the near vicinity from doing the same thing? Or how does that relate moving down the road to these amendments being progressed up that strip of road that were mostly 2-acre lots when they were handed out after the war?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Byrne and members of council. So anybody has the right to apply for a planning application at whatever time in their life they want to, and they can ask for whatever it is that they want to achieve on their property. Staff would help them in terms of providing comment during the pre-consultation process, and then we would process it in accordance with our standard processing activities. This is one issue in terms of accessory apartments, the number and location of that is on our radar in terms of our official plan update and our zoning bylaw update. So at that time, we will be reviewing whether we should be allowing activities like this to have an accessory apartment in an accessory building in the rural area as of right. So at this point, we haven't done that research and determined that that's the direction we're going, but will be under consideration.
And it's safe to say that given the changes in the entitlements in the provincial planning policies, that it's safe to say that this sort of application, whether it's the apartment or not, the rebuilding or re-intensification or infilling, whatever vernacular you want to use from a planning department, it's safe to say that this sort of application is one that we're going to see more and more of with the entitlement to that secondary suites, et cetera. Is that a fair statement, Ms. Ellis?
To you, Mayor Graham, members of council, yes. So the provincial policy world has changed dramatically in the last several years. So right now, like in Millbrook, you can have a single detached dwelling or main residential use and 2 accessory apartments. And one of those can be as of right in an accessory building because that area is on piped water and sewer. In the rural area, we have some flexibility in terms of how much intensification or additional residential units that we want to permit as of right. And that's an area of study that we need to take seriously before coming forward to council with a recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Councilor Nacho.
Thank you through you, Mayor. Kind of speaking just to Mr. Burns' point there, with this hydrology study that's going to be done to see that it has no adverse effects on surrounding areas for water quality and water flow. We would have to assume at some point we're going to hit a capacity and then you'll no longer be able to take new applications in that immediate area. So will this hydrology study be able to kind of give you a working idea of how many you think you'll be able to manage over like the next 10 years? Or is this going to have to be a case by case hydrology study with each application?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Natchoff and members of council and members of the public. The scoped hydrogeological study for this application will be scoped to this property only. So it's unfair for us to ask individual property owners to do an area-wide hydrogeological study. That, to be honest, would be the best alternative, but it's not really an option for us at this time. We do know that we are going to get some hydrology information in the area through the submission of other applications. We don't have them yet, but we're aware that there are applications coming. So we are at this point looking at individual scoped hydrogeological assessments, if council thinks that's appropriate, moving forward on an individual basis. And we will look at that information and see what it says. And then over time, as we get, if we get a couple or several or 5 or 6 or 10, we will probably have a good idea of what we're looking at in terms of the area. So I can tell you, we haven't had, to the best of my knowledge, we have not had any issues in terms of water quality and quantity to date. But we know in a certain portion of the hamlet that there may be quality issue or quantity issues, but we don't know for sure, and that would be really old historical information. So we're trying to be prudent to make sure that people's individual services remain safe and appropriate for the level of development.
Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I guess I'm curious about the extra entrance permit that's required. Like it looks like there's a separate driveway completely to this new dwelling. And then I guess, as things roll on and if more of these, come before us, I mean, we're gonna have a whole lot of entrances all through this area. And I don't know whether that's gonna raise confusion for like fire services or everything else, right? Because you're gonna have multiple entranceways to multiple properties. Like for all intents and purposes, it might as well be a severed lot. With entrances and separate pieces. Like, how do we handle that?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, members of council. I understand your point completely. It's something that we look at in terms of the planning aspects of how the hamlet gets developed. In this particular case, the location of the existing house and the detached garage make it very difficult to share an entrance, and that's why they're proposing a new entrance. So in the future, whenever possible, we would be certainly asking people to share an entrance. The entrance permit requirements, though, are under the purview of the Public Works Department, and planning staff defers to Public Works in terms of their requirements and their comments. Sorry, guys.
Mr. Hancock, would you like to speak to that?
I think through Mr. Mayor to the Deputy Mayor, basically the frontage on the lot is quite large, and we did investigate the lot and then look at sight lines. So the second entrance is not a problem. We would, as mentioned by the Director of Planning, we would promote common entrances. That's kind of our standard practice. But under the bylaw, they can have a second entrance presently. Just happens that it works to this additional dwelling. So we're not seeing a problem in this particular lot.
Deputy Mayor, follow up?
I guess this is a follow-up. I mean, I guess part of it could be moving the original entrance over slightly and having it branch. So you still only retain one entrance for it. But if you're saying that the bylaw already says we have two entrances, that's kind of a moot issue, I guess.
Seeing no other questions, we can move to questions and comments from members of the public in attendance today. No other questions, going once, going twice. Okay. So if any members of the public would like to step forward to the podium to speak to this application, we're just going to ask. So first of all, we'll get that button pushing out of the way. So I'll turn my button off and you'll wait a second, push the button until it lights up red. Then you can talk. And when you're finished talking, you'll hit it again. When you approach the mic, we'd like you to say your name and address so you can speak to the application, and then we'll go from there. So the floor is open to members of the public now. Anyone wishing to come forward to speak to the application. Going once, going twice. Okay. Seeing, would you like to speak? Yeah, this is the time. So as I said, I'll push mine off and you'll push this big gray button and then state your name and address.
Hi, I just wanted to know where the second. Is that around now? My name is Catherine Bassiano, and I live right beside this property. My address? Oh, sorry, 2152 Davis Road is my mother's house. So my question is, I just wanted to know where this new road driveway is going to be. In adjacent to it, so are they getting rid of the one that's there and they're adding to it?
So I believe if staff scroll, this is the rough drawing as of right now, as you can see it. So as we've discussed, based on the bylaw, there is 2 permitted entrances allowed for this property. And so because of as that was mentioned before, you can see the garage and the existing house, it kind of obstructs the ability for that driveway to continue on through to the next home. So because the bylaw allows, they can have the second entrance that would go sort of beside that house directly, kind of almost in the middle of the lot to the next property. So that's what's proposed. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Thank you. Other members wishing to come forward and speak, you're welcome to. Yeah, so it's everything is drawn there. Yep. Yep. Okay. With no one else coming forward, we will close the public portion of the meeting and go to consideration of the report. There are two recommendations in the report that council receive and consider all comments related to the zoning bylaw amendment application, and that with no objections following the public meeting, the bylaw number 2023-47 being bylaw to amend bylaw number 2018-58 as amended, otherwise known as the Township of Cameron zoning bylaw, be presented to council for approval. Can I look for a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much, council. We'll look forward for that coming back before council, Ms. Ellis. Nope, sorry, that is done. Sorry, strike that from the record. Moving on now, we move to 10.1. 9.6, excuse me. Where are we here? Oh, here we are, 9.6. So then with 9.6, I need a resolution to close the public meeting. Councillor Edgerton, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is good. Then we are closed. Thank you for that, Ms. Page. So 10.1 is the minutes of the regular meeting held June 5th, 2023. Can I have a mover to approve those minutes as presented? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Edgerton, you good to second that? All in favor? That is approved. There are no minutes from committees or boards at this time, so we'll move on to the reports section of the agenda. And you are first, Ms. Pope, Finance 2023-07 user fees and charges bylaw amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to all of council, we have before you a revision of the 2023 user fees and charges bylaw. This is a bylaw that we normally bring forward in November annually to council for review. However, just because of the number of changes with Bill 23, we're bringing it forward to you early with the recommendations contained within the report for your review and approval today.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. With regards to this report, I don't, council can just endure me for a little while longer. I don't have any problems, obviously, with the requirements in the amended proposal here, but with regards to, there were two additions that I just thought warranted council's attention that I wasn't comfortable with, and that is that one being the $2 fee for the usage of the walking track. I know the intention behind that. I'm sure Mr. Allison's not here today, but I think he is eligible to speak to it. But I think we can save. So yeah, we'll get there. And anyways, with regards to that, I'm assuming the intention is to address all the issues that we've been having with users and a lot of traffic that is not walking track oriented. We've had kids dangling and unfortunately having not acceptable interactions over the railings as well. So I understand the motivation behind that, but I really don't think that a $2 charge is merited or has the intention, because I think this is a very important piece of accessible infrastructure for recreation. And I don't think a $2 charge and the administration to accomplish that really achieves the objective. And then with regards to the $20 fee for the pass, I'm okay with I know that we were talking about creating these cards to allow electronic access. So that makes sense. But rather than it be an annual membership fee, as long as it was a $20 deposit for covering the cost of the card therein, that was maybe refundable should they no longer wish to have that membership, I would be far more comfortable with that component of usage improvement and access than I would be a $2 charge and a $20 membership, because I just think it sends the wrong message to the community. So that's my comments, but I'm getting ahead of myself with the report, but I just wanted everyone to be aware of those and open for discussion. Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, on that note, I firmly support that idea because it seems to be detrimental to the whole concept of that. I'm just wondering about, are we still engaging in restricted hours for the taxpayers that live here to use that facility?
So I'm sure Mr. Allison can speak to that, but with regards to the usage, so the idea behind it, because I asked a number of questions of staff about this to make a solution that I thought was more viable. The idea is that if you're interested in using it for hours where there maybe not be staffing, then you can have access to this $20 deposit for a key that can get you electronic access only when the facility is open. But because of the lack of our ability to require more staff there to be present, if you're going to have some sort of registration in the absence of the $2 fee, that will only be eligible access during the times when the staffing and complement is there, which I believe is currently between 7 and Ms. Hurley, you'd like to speak to that, or you want me to go to Chris after all of that? Chris, would you like to weigh in on this? You've taken the effort to join us, so I may as well let you speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me now?
We can, Chris, go for it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, currently we are still open 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. We have ball hockey going on right now. Ball hockey will be finished next week, and we will have to review the hours at that time. As for the $2, we were looking, so we do have a lot of patrons that are coming from outside of town, and this was an option for patrons to be able to access the track. If they're coming to watch a hockey game from outside of town, they'd still be able to pay their $2 and be able to access the track at that time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I understand the intention behind it. I think when there's games of significance, we'll have to create some clear policies and understanding when if we're going to move forward with this sort of pass access, that people don't feel as though the deposit for the cost of the key entitles them to dedicated usage or isolated usage. It's just the access to get in without having to sign in every time, sort of from a management standpoint. But when there are games of significance, obviously it's a shared space, being a public entity in a municipal building. So I wouldn't want to charge people fees for that sort of purpose, because then I think there has to be some corollary benefit or isolated use or entitlement to that usage. And I'd much prefer this sort of pay for the cost of the key. And if you lose it, well, you just have to pay the cost to replace it. That's all it is. It's more of a cost recovery than it is a punitive or a revenue generating model. So that's the modus operandi behind that. But I do understand and appreciate the issues that have been ongoing, because they are very, very serious, and we'll have to keep an eye on it and see if this has any influence on correcting that behavior. But thank you for joining us too, Chris. I know you're off this week. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Through that, I do have a question about the wording of ages 18 plus unless accompanied by an adult. What are we considering an adult? Like, is an 18 plus an adult?
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, yes, it'd be an adult. Anybody under 18 would have to be accompanied by an adult.
That's not quite what it says. Okay.
I can't see it right now. I'm sorry.
It says ages 18 plus unless accompanied by an adult. Okay.
Okay.
Right there.
Sorry, well, through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, we'll have to review the wording on that.
Okay. So I think the wording will need to be amended with regards to the motion anyway. So I think we can get it right at this time, because if it seems like I haven't heard any objections to some of the alterations, so we'll have to get that. There is, I think, a motion that we'll have to work on some language in as well to make sure that it's accurate when we approve it. So I think maybe Ms. Pope can sort of give us some direction in that regard with regards to what she feels is the appropriate, how to incorporate that into the motion that we're going to move forward with. Do you have another question, Deputy Mayor Hunt?
Thank you, Chair. Just maybe a clarification. So is it saying that anybody under 18 has to pay $2? Because now if we reverse that, what it's saying that you don't have to pay it unless you're accompanied by that. Like I'm totally confused on what that's trying to achieve.
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, the intent is that anybody under 18 would be free with the adult. Over 18 would pay the $2.
Right. And I think the issue becomes, yeah, exactly. The issue becomes if we're striking the $2, that language is no longer relevant, because yeah, anyway, so moving along. Other questions with regards to the rest of the report? Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. I was just curious what the guesstimate is revenues from this over a calendar year and how much it differs from year past.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, we don't, we haven't really tracked the track since COVID. COVID, it was free, so people were just in and out. So we haven't really, we have no way of accessing how many people have been in the track, how many are using the track. With key fob system, we would be able to track who's going through that door. We'd be able to track the first year, how many people have got the season pass, how many people have got the $2 pass. Currently, we're just looking, it's a pretty low number. It's just to cover the cost of the key fobs and a little bit of administration. That's about it.
And again, if the motion goes forward as presented, the cost it won't be revenue generating. It'll just be a cost recovery because you're only paying a deposit for the card. You only get we only would receive the revenue from the deposit if we had to incur the cost of replacing the card, and thus not revenue. So if we proceed as I'm trying to propose, and eventually will propose, then it will be not revenue generating whatsoever, because we haven't been generating revenue from the walking track at all, unless there's a few dedicated rentals, which I believe there have been a few, Chris, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we have had a few track rentals.
So that would be the only revenue generating opportunities for the walking track. Okay. Very good. So I believe I have the correct wording in the motion, but we'll let staff correct me when I'm wrong. That council approved bylaw number 2023-46, being a bylaw to impose and consolidate user fees and charges effective June 26, 2023, as amended under the walking track fee to remove drop-in and annual membership to read access card deposit, refundable upon return. And that is the motion. I will move it because it was my brainchild, as butchered as it may be. Seconded by Councillor Natchoff. Any questions about the motion? Then all in favor? That is carried. Thank you for behooving me, members of council. That's very appreciative. And I think everyone accessing the walking track will just hope that the behavior improves this season moving forward. And hopefully this gesture of making it free will help instill those sorts of attitudes. Moving on in the council agenda, give me a second to float around. We are now on report 12-2, the Tower Hill North pre-servicing agreement. I believe Mr. Hancock is leading this, or is it you, Mr. Connolly? Mr. Connolly, please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to council, you'll have before you it's a joint report between Planning, Economic Development, and Public Works, PEB 2023-31, which is Tower Hill Developments Inc. pre-servicing agreement with a recommendation that bylaw number 2023-49 be approved to authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the pre-servicing agreement between Tower Hill North Developments Inc. and the Township of Cavan-Monaghan, with the insertion of a final financial numbers authorized by the Township Solicitor and or CAO. I'll highlight the fact that Tower Hill Development wants to construct certain on-site services prior to the registration of the subdivision and the execution and registration of the subdivision agreement. This is a pre-service agreement that was produced by legal counsel for the township. And again, because there are a few items that still need to be finalized, we want to have that prior to the finalization that the mayor and clerk sign the agreement that's before council today. If you have any questions, there's myself and Director Hancock to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Questions, members of council? Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. I apologize. I had a note here. Item 8 in one of the reports, if I can't lay my hands on it right now, it referred to meetings if they were going to move material on site. I think I'm addressing the right thing, and I just thought it would be the right time to bring it up. So they've been moving dirt out there for several months now. And I'm just wondering where those meetings, how they happen and what goes on at them and what we're looking at there. I'm just looking from the outside, looking in, there's a lot of movement.
Director Hancock, would you like to speak to that one?
Appreciate the councillor bit. Promotion. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Item 1 is Tower Hill have already entered into a site alteration permit, so the pre-grading of the site is underway under the site alteration. They hold meetings every 2 weeks on site, and primarily it's dealing with the channel construction and the overall grading. The pre-servicing that we're talking about is actually to put pipes in the ground and construct the roadways. So they have a site alteration agreement that's already been executed by the township, and they're proceeding hopefully in July to start putting services in. So hopefully that explains it.
Thank you, Director Hancock, for that clarification. Other questions, members of council? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report that that bylaw number 2023-49 be approved to authorize the mayor and the clerk to sign the pre-service agreement between Tower Hill North Developments and the Township of Cavan with the insertion of a final financial numbers authorized by the Township Solicitor and or CAO. Looking for a mover and a seconder for that report. Councillor Natshaw and Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much, both Mr. Conley and Mr. Hancock. Moving on to 12.3. The intention to repeal and replace sections of the Village of Millbrook bylaws designating properties under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Ms. Ellis.
Mayor Graham, members of council, staff and guests, planning report 2023-33 is before you today with the recommendation that should no objections be received during the mandatory 30-day public objection period following publication of the notice of intention of repeal and replace, the bylaws listed in the report be presented to council for approval. So this is the second part of our program to repeal and replace our heritage designation bylaws. If you remember, Connor Mitchner was here previously and we dealt with bylaws back in March. So we have now circulated the second set, which are 4 bylaws in accordance with requirements of the provincial legislation. And we're close to the 30-day period, but we're not there yet. So we can't approve them today, but through that circulation, we did hear from one landowner and the comments received from the landowner are included in the report. The bylaw has been amended as per those comments from that landowner. So the recommendation before you today is that we will bring the bylaws back in August for approval unless we receive something in the next couple of days to change our course of action. And then you will, over the course of the next several months, be seeing this type of report regularly.
So no long list of strenuous bylaws for me to read today, but I'll do my vocal exercises before August. Very good. Questions, members of council? This is just a formality to moving as we continue to update the heritage bylaws. Going to ask for a mover and a seconder for the report and the recommendation before us. Councillor Natshaw and Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Moving on, we are now at 12.5 report, which is Public Works Sidewalk Plow Tender. I believe Mr. Hutchison has dressed for this presentation today, so we'll allow Drew to speak to it. Oh, sorry, Ms. Ian. Oh, sorry, I skipped. Sorry, I was so excited about Drew's outfit. I had to, no disrespect, Bridget. You look lovely as well. Report 12.4, Community Improvement Plan Incentive Program. Ms. Ian, please and thank you with my apologies.
Thank you, Mayor. The report before council is PEB 2023-34. It is the 2023 Community Improvement Plan Incentive Program. The recommendation before council is that council direct staff to implement the incentive programs identified in this report for the expanded area in Cavan-Monaghan.
Thank you, Ms. Iat. Looking forward to getting this all opened up so that the rest of the township can hopefully take in the benefits and be beneficiaries of the redevelopment like has been eligible in the Village of Millbrook. Questions, members of council, with regards to the CIP and opening up all the programs? Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, I was curious to what part of our official plan right now inhibits any other areas in the township from being included in this, even though this was started several years ago and was emphasized that it was only going to be the Millbrook core. And now you're starting to take in the fringe areas, which I really have a problem with after Trudeau, but the nonsense. But is there something actually in the official plan that restricted it to just being the Millbrook settlement?
Ms. Iat.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Initially, when we started the program, it was just for Millbrook. We had policies within the official plan that specifically provided for that. When we expanded the CIP to include the urban fringe and rural areas, so really the rest of the township, we amended the official plan to include policies to provide for that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and being on that committee, I can speak to just to provide a bit more clarity. So the intention and the design around CIPs is usually geographically focused. And what was the endeavor that we went through, and I'll take a little bit of, I was very adamant that this be opened up to the remainder of the township. So I will, and it was no easy task to do it. So I appreciate Bridget and enduring all the meetings with me to make it happen. And so we're really excited about that. But the intention is usually around intensifying specific areas or hamlets, to beautification being the major course, and signage, bylaws, and things of that nature, which obviously the village has been very beneficial. The village of Millbrook has benefited from greatly. So we're very optimistic that with this supplement of programs, that there is eligibility for maybe non-traditional beautification type programs or signage programs that can still be eligible for, whether they're home-based businesses, agricultural-based businesses, and even accessibility standards for and senior supportive housing components that are available in these programs, that the rest of the community can have the same financial access to benefits that are more suited to their nature. So, Councillor Nacho.
Thank you, Chair, through you. If that be the case and we are expanding it, would we maybe want to consider like changing the name from Millbrook Community Improvement Plan to Cavan Monaghan Community Improvement Plan, so that it's kind of what Jerry was saying as well, that it's not just subject to the village of Millbrook?
So I can, Bridget, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the discussions that we had was whether it's the creation of two separate versus one. So the issue is somewhat of a fiscal, and that one exists, and it's being, the continuation or expansion within the existing format allowed us eligibility to certain funding that would otherwise not be eligible to create a second. So name aside, maybe we can work on something once it's opened up, that there might be future opportunities to rename it later date. But as we want to get it up and running, this was one of the more streamlined things, to just allow the existing program to be expanded to allow for the access to be occurred without changing the name. Bridget, I'll allow you to correct any mistakes that I've made.
Through Mayor to Councillor Natchoff, no correction necessary. The two plans are read in tandem, so it does kind of have its own name. It is the Community Improvement Plan expansion. So it is intended to go to the expanded areas of the CIP. So as Mayor Graham had said, we initially started with the Millbrook plan, and then we expanded upon it. The funding that we did receive through OMAPRA would allow for us to expand, but it wouldn't necessarily allow us to create new. So that's why we referred to it. But in terms of marketing, we refer to it as the expanded CIP.
What's in a name? Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, is this the portion where we'll be talking about when businesses in the area, whether they be anywhere in the township, would apply for these grants and stuff? Or is that going to be later on?
Is that?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Byrne. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So when I do my reading here, there's a process for application for a business or whatever to apply for. And I had some questions on that, but I'm not sure if that's at this point in the discussion or whether you're going to touch on that a little later, because I was kind of curious what your protocol is. So does being in the village of Millbrook going to carry more weight for an individual to apply, as say there was some structure there for agricultural purposes and whatever, and how that's going to work? And I think there was a $25,000 budget. I think that's a maximum. And what you do, there's a lot of different percentages in the statistics there that you can apply for. And I'm just wondering how the pecking order works. So that somebody in the community applies, is it first come and then the money's gone, or how that works?
So I can answer a bit of that. So there is an application process, but if in the report, I believe it speaks to the fact that this being a new area in the expansion area, that all of the 25,000 is exclusively eligible for the expanded area, not the Village of Millbrook this year. And then how we fund it moving forward can be adjusted, but because Millbrook's had its kick at the can for years previously, they aren't eligible for this current allotment of programs in the 2023 CIP. They're only eligible for buildings in that fringe area outside of the traditional area and in throughout the rest of the township in this year for the 25,000. And then all the submissions are taken in and they're given their own criteria within these various programs. And it's a comprehensive list that sorry, I thought you were saying my mic was off and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. No, and then, so there is an application and they are paired against each other, but that's not to say that there can't be multiple awards of some value that is set aside for that specific program. Messiah, want to correct me?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. No, just adding to your comments, there is evaluation criteria that we do use for each of the applications. It's based on the goals that we're trying to achieve with the CIP. So in terms of weights, it's the project that helps us achieve the goals to the greatest extent, I guess, for lack of a better expression, or give us the biggest bang for our buck. So if it ticks off all the boxes for evaluation criteria, then we would give priority to them. We also take into consideration how much funds are there. So in a lot of cases, there are some really, really good projects. We want to see all of them funded, but we can't fund all of them. So we try and spread out as much as we can.
Councilor Byrne, follow up?
If I understand that correctly, then, so you would take in the bulk of the applications and then kind of divvy out portions to everybody, or the highest priority would get the money, and if there's any left, then some of the other portions would be split around.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Yes, we would look at each application. The highest scoring based on the evaluation criteria would get funding, depending on what they're asking for. In previous years, we've had a lot of really, really good applications. We didn't want to turn down any applications, so we spread the funding out as best we could. We would try and give applications that were scored the highest as close to what they asked for as we possibly could. And then anything that was maybe a little bit lower down the evaluation criteria, we might give them a little bit, but we probably wouldn't give them exactly what they asked for. It's not completely scientific, but.
Well, I think the important thing is that, as with any new expansion or new offering, I think it's really the most important thing is that the eligibility in these throughout the township outside of the Village of Millbrook is something that people need to apply for. So I think the biggest priority for members of council and members of the public can be is really highlighting that accessibility or eligibility to businesses, because there have been years where there's not a lot of applications even in the Village of Millbrook that have been aware of it. So it's really important that we stimulate as much interest as we can. And then, like I said, if not this year, then the idea is that we fund it on an annual basis, maybe either alternating or changing different program complements so that everyone can partake in it once we do a catch-up year or two with regards to the outside region. Thank you. Questions, Deputy Mayor Huntley, and then I'll back to Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to add one more component to that is, like, as this is the inaugural year for the expansion, all the programs I believe we are leaving open this year, and in future years, to Councilor Byrne's point, is we do start to refine which programs we are having. So it's not necessarily all, I think there's 14 of them, somewhere in that neighborhood. Anyway, but each of those, but what we'll do is we'll select funds that go specifically to certain, nope, stop scrolling, leave it where it is. to any of those specific program names. So all, like, we could take the 25,000, assuming that's the allotment for the year, and put it all towards heritage conservation. But because this is an inaugural year, we're leaving them all open so that anybody can apply under any one of these categories.
Through you, Chair. On that note, is this 25,000, is that pretty well been the standard since the inception of this? And over the years, have you always given out the maximum? And if not, would that value that's left fall into the next year or just get lost in the shuffle?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Yes, 25,000 is about the average that we've offered every year. With the exception of the first year, we actually received a one-time grant from the province of about $45,000. So that offset what we offered as the municipality. So we actually had a little bit more for the program, but on average, we try and do 25,000 a year. So I think there was a second part to your question. I apologize. What? Okay.
Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Ayad, I guess, I think you might have this number at your fingertips, I'm hoping, but with our investment of 25,000, how much do you think we actually get back in return?
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley. I'm so glad you asked that question. If my calculations are correct, over the last 3 years, the township has invested approximately 120,000 in the CIP. That includes the 45,000 of investment that came from the province. That was the one-time contribution. So probably our own investment on the taxpayer dollars, about $66,000. From that, the community has invested about $557,000. So for every dollar invested, we're seeing about a $5 return, and that's with the contribution from the province. That number is higher if we subtract that out. So it is a really successful program, and it is proven to see a lot of improvement in the community.
Councillor Nacho?
Through you, Chair, thank you. I can personally speak to this because my business was actually one that qualified to get funding through CIP. And thank you for that. We did renovations to make our bathroom wheelchair accessible and compliant, in addition with the funding to have the patio out. And given the how businesses have been affected with COVID and the inflation, that I would say that potentially without having that funding, we may not still be in business today. So it has been a, incredible benefit to my business, and just hearing from the community of, what we're able to bring to the community. So great program in my opinion.
Thank you for that, Councillor Natchoff, and Ms. Ayad for that quick math. Seeing no other questions, the motion before us with this report is that council directs staff to implement the incentive programs identified in this report for the expanded area in Cavan Monaghan. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Natchoff, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Now, the much anticipated report, sorry again, Public Works 2023-15 sidewalk plow tender, Mr. Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to members of council. Before you, there is one recommendation for the sidewalk plow tender T-PW-23-06. The recommendation before you is that council award the sidewalk plow tender T-PW-23-06 to Joe Johnson Equipment Limited at the lowest tender amount of $181,415.93. The total tender amount with net municipal HST is $184,608.85.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchison. Questions, members of council, with regards to the tender? Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, is there any anticipation at all? I know you don't have a crystal ball. We ran into problems with the snowplow last year. This merchandise that we're buying, it's already available type of thing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. So in the tender, we did have a contract end date of November 1st, and the supplier has confirmed that there shouldn't be any issues accommodating that date.
Excellent. Great news. Other questions? Seeing none, look for a mover. I'll read the recommendation. That council award the sidewalk plow tender TPW 23-06 to FST Canada Inc. or operating as Joe Johnson Equipment Limited at the lowest tendered amount of $181,415.93 with HST in the amount of $23,584.07 and the total amount of $205,000. The total tender amount with the net municipal HST is $184,608.85 funded by development charges. Look for a mover. Councillor Byrne, Deputy Mayor Huntley is the seconder. All in favor? That is approved. Moving on in the agenda. Thank you for that, Drew. We are now at Public Works 2023-16, Sewer Use Bylaw 2023-48. I believe Ms. Bradley is presenting today. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before you is Public Works Report 2023-16 for Sewer Use Bylaw 2023-48. The two recommendations in front of you is that council repeal the Township Sewer Use Bylaw number 2010-86 being the old bylaw, and that council authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the revised sewer use bylaw number 2023-48 being a bylaw to regulate and control of discharges to the township sewer systems, to protect the public health and safety and the environment.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Questions, members of council? Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, when I was looking at this and you're trying to get people to come off their sump pumps and their eave troughs and even washing their cars in their driveway or emptying their pools and backwashing, how are they supposed to, especially in a Millbrook area, not keep that from going into storm drains? And I get the concept that you're doing. I just don't know how you're going to, because basically there's a lot of facilities in Millbrook where the water runs through the basement. If you pump it onto the street, that's going to end up in the storm drain, as far as I'm aware. I don't know how you're going to regulate that. And there's one section in there where you were talking about garages and it's any sediment coming off a vehicle. I didn't know if that was exclusive or somebody that's doing their car in the driveway in the spring is going to get dinged with putting salt into the ecosystem or whatever. I just don't know how you're going to get all that water out of the basements of houses in Millbrook and not end them up somewhere in the filtration system.
Ms. Bradley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Burns. The idea is to disconnect the sump pumps that are currently connected to sanitary sewer, which we are using capacity at our wastewater facilities for uncontaminated water. It is the intention to put it to either storm drain or to infiltration onto private property. And that is because it is uncontaminated as long as the homeowner is diligent in ensuring it is uncontaminated, and we will monitor it closely. And for locations that have restricted property, you are going to look at alternatives from the township side of things to make that make it available for them to do that.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I guess unless you're doing sewer repair work, how will you detect whether there's some pumps discharging into the sewer system?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, or sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Huntley. The for during storm events and spring runoff at the wastewater plant, the flow coming in, we have flow monitors. We can very well notice an increase in infiltration of water that is not originating from sanitary activities. So with that, we will be doing further investigation in certain areas in the township to see if there are older areas that have more infiltration than others, and we can sort of narrow our search down to locate the most influential areas.
Other questions, members of council? Seeing none, there are two recommendations in the report that council repeal the township sewer use bylaw number 2010-86 and the council authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute the revised sewer use bylaw number 2023-48, being a bylaw to regulate the control of discharges to the township sewer system to protect public health and safety and the environment. Any questions? Looking for a mover? Councillor Edgerton will move it. Looking for seconder, Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Moving on in our agenda, 12.8 CAO report and capital status, Ms. Hurley.
You. If you have any questions, we have amended the capital section of it and we have identified when the works are, the timelines on the works at completion time. So some of them you can take a look and we've sort of addressed that last week so that we have a little bit of notes in there if you have any questions regarding capital projects.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Questions with regards to the CAO capital status report? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, more comments. I guess, congratulations, you can knock CIP extended off the list now.
Very good. Excellent. If no other questions, we'll look for a moment to receive that status update report for information. Councilor Natchoff, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Council and committee verbal reports. Anyone have a verbal report with regards to their appointments or committees? I don't see a lot of action. Councilor Byrne and I, that was loud. Ooh, I really leaned in there. Just not a committee verbal report, but I know Councilor Byrne and I were in attendance for the 75th anniversary of the Lions Club, which was very well attended. We had both our MP and MPP and the county warden in attendance. So all the brass was there for that recommendation. So it was nice to see everyone and celebrate the 75 years of service that the Lions have been providing the community. Obviously, the community is a better place for it. So we just wanted to pass on their congratulations and thanks to the other political representatives for coming and recognizing that significant anniversary. So seeing no council verbal reports, other than that small contribution that I made, can I ask for a motion to receive that for information? Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councilor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. There is no general business. There is no correspondence for information. There is one piece of correspondence for action, the 15.1 legislative amendments to improve municipal codes of conduct and enforcement. Councilor Natchoff, did you want to speak to this briefly?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, please. So on the date of, I have it open. On the 8th of June, all of the council members received a correspondence from Diane Noble on behalf of the Women of Ontario Say No. And so it's a legislative amendment to improve municipal codes of conduct and enforcement. So I'm just going to read from the letter that was provided, and I feel rather strongly about this and hope that my fellow council members will choose to want to support this or put our support behind it. Whereas all Ontarians deserve and expect a safe and respectable workplace, whereas municipal governments as the democratic institutions most directly engaged with Ontarians need respectful discourse. Whereas several incidents in recent years of disrespectful behavior and workplace harassment have occurred amongst members of municipal councils. Whereas these incidents seriously and negatively affect the people involved and lower public perceptions of local governments. Whereas municipal codes of conduct are helpful tools to set expectations of council member behavior. Whereas municipal governments do not have the necessary tools to adequately enforce compliance with municipal codes of conduct. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Township of Cavan Monaghan support the call of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for the Government of Ontario to introduce legislation to strengthen municipal codes of conduct and compliance with them in consultation with municipal governments. Also be resolved that the legislation encompasses the Association of Municipalities of Ontario's recommendations for 1, updating municipal codes of conduct to account for workplace safety and harassment. 2, create a flexible administrative penalty regime adapt to the local economic and financial circumstances of municipalities across Ontario. 3, increasing training of municipal integrity commissions to enhance consistency of investigations and recommendations across the province. 4, allow municipalities to apply to a member of the judiciary to remove a city member if recommended through the report of a municipal integrity commissioner. And finally, prohibit a member so removed from sitting for election in the term of removal and the subsequent term of office. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions with regards to, so that's a motion that's been presented then, so we look for a mover and a seconder for that motion, and then we can discuss it. Anyone willing to move? I guess Councilor Natchez is moving it. Anyone willing to second it? I'll second it. Discussion about the motion. Any questions? We can just go to a vote then, if no one has any questions. All in favor of the motion? That is approved. Very good. Thank you for that, Councilor Natchez. Thanks for bringing that forward. Bylaws, my favorite part. So bylaw number 2023-46 being a bylaw to impose and consolidate user fees and charges be approved as amended. Bylaw number 2023-47 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2018-58 as amended, otherwise known as the Township of Cavan zoning bylaw, and bylaw number 23-48 being, oh, sorry, I gotta get my other sheet up. 23-48 being a bylaw to prohibit, regulate, and control the discharge of water and waste into the municipal sanitary and stormwater sewer systems and wastewater treatment works to regulate the control, extensions, and alterations or enlargements to the sewer system within the municipality. And that bylaw number 2023-49 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a pre-servicing agreement between Tower Hill North Developments, Inc., subdivider in the Township of Cavan Municipality and the Corporation of the Township of Cavan be read a first, second, and third time and passed this 26th day of June, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Can I get a mover for that bylaw? Councilor Natchez, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. There is no unfinished business. Any notices of motion? Councilor Byrne, notice of motion? Sorry. Oh,
I apologize. Through you, Chair, on the issue of the user fees, I did want to ask one question. Can I do that now, please? That doesn't affect my vote outcome. Just a clarification. When there was this charge for mortgage account adjustments, I didn't know, I'm thinking that means that if somebody's bank rate goes up and they have to get more monies attached to whatever they're paying for their taxes, is that what we're looking at, or what are we looking at there?
is there, because the bylaws already been, we've just read them and been approved. I missed a question from Councilor Nelson on that as well, and that he's going to speak to the chief about after. Can we take that offline and talk with Kimberly about that? Because we're kind of past it with regards to the format. I apologize, Councilor Byrne. Very good. So where are we at? So we're looking for a mover and a seconder for the bylaw. We have that. Do we vote on that? We have not voted on that, so we're now voting for that. All in favor, that's approved. There is no notices of motion confirming bylaw number 2023-50 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held June 26, 2023, be read a first, second, third time and passed this 26th day of June, signed by the mayor and the clerk and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councilor Natchez, Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor of the confirming bylaw, that is approved. Now we need a motion to adjourn. Councilor Natchez, Councilor Edgerton, all in favor, that is approved. There are a list of upcoming meetings. We're obviously in our summer break. Most importantly, there is a Canada Day celebration this Saturday from 11 till 2 at the CMCC. There's also this evening, the Milford Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting being held at 4 p.m. in the council chambers. And our next regularly scheduled council meeting is Monday, August 14th, 2023 at 1 p.m. Wishing everyone a safe and happy summer, and we will see you in August and hopefully this weekend. Take care.